This is Under the Dome. On today's episode, we'll look at what it's like to own a shuttered bar in North Carolina and what policy could save those bars.
Welcome to Under the Dome. I'm Colin Campbell, editor of the NC Insider. Well, we're finally turning the corner a little bit on the COVID issue, and we're seeing our first easing of restrictions as of last couple days. That's definitely good news for the industry that's been hit hardest by the restrictions aimed at fighting the pandemic. And of course, that's bars that are not attached to restaurants or breweries or anything like that. Well, for months, we've been able to sit inside at restaurants, breweries, and distilleries and drink alcohol. Bars have only been allowed to offer a limited outdoor service. And with mostly cold, wet winter, getting customers to hang out outside has been a pretty tough sell. The bars got good news recently with the new executive order from Governor Cooper that allows them to reopen indoor service at 30% capacity, as well as keep serving until 11 p.m. without a curfew. So to find out what things are like inside the world of bars, I'm joined by Zack Medford, who leads the NC Bar and Tavern Association that's been lobbying pretty hard over the last few months to try to get bars back open, at least at some limited capacity. He also owns several bars in downtown Raleigh and elsewhere, including Isaac Hunter's Tavern and Parliament. Zack, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Colin.
Yeah. Just describe, I guess, to start off, what the last year has been like for you. It's been, I guess, almost a full year since you've been able to serve drinks indoors at several of your establishments. What's that been like as you've been trying to keep your business afloat and take care as best you can of the employees that you've had?
You know, I really don't think there is a business in the world that can survive an entire year with absolutely no revenues while they still have to pay rent, bills, power, insurance, you name it. And that's the circumstances that North Carolina's bars and taverns have been facing since March 17th, 2020. It's been a really, really tough year. And just today, we're finally starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Have you been, what's the decision-making process? You've had one of your bars, Coughlin's downtown, where you ultimately decided a couple months back that you're going to have to shut that down permanently. How do you decide how to go forward with, a really uncertain picture as to when you can get back to normal operations and a normal, amount of customers and sales at these businesses?
It's been really tough. Business owners like myself, but pretty much anybody that's been having to go through this pandemic knows that you wake up, you take it one day at a time, you make the tough decisions that day. And, with so much uncertainty facing all of us, it's extremely hard to plan. As a bar owner, we closed on March 17th. We figure we'll be closed for a month or two. We get the situation under control, and then, come the summer, we'd be allowed to reopen. Well, month after month went by, the weather started getting colder and the days started getting shorter. And we realized this is it. This is the long haul. Unfortunately, we had our bar, Isaac Hunter's Tavern in downtown Raleigh. We had somebody come along in October and made us a very, low offer to purchase the place. And honestly, we couldn't afford to reopen it if we tried at that point. With all the back rent due, like I said, the insurance and all the mounting bills. So we had to take the deal and we sold Isaac Hunter's Tavern and hope to be able to keep Coughlin's Raleigh going. But, towards the end of the year, our landlord came with his hand out and he said, look, you guys haven't paid rent all year. I need you to go ahead and pay me all your back rent or you got to go. And it was tough for us because we've been in that spot for over 8 years. And we did everything we could to pay the rent for the first few months, but after month goes by where there's no customers, there's no money coming in, you can't keep paying rent. I can't pay myself. I've got 3 sons. I got a wife. I got a house to pay the mortgage on. At a certain point, it stops being how am I going to pay my business bills and it starts being how am I going to pay for groceries? And been really tough decisions to make. And I hope that we're done making the tough decisions. I hope that we can start focusing on the future. For a lot of bar owners, they don't have that luxury, I guess. I think a lot of bars across North Carolina have closed their doors for good.
What's the last year been like for your staff? Have many of them just been completely out of work, or have some of them just moved on to other industries and other types of jobs that have been, hit less hard?
When we closed down on March 17th, we had to lay off over 80 employees across our 5 bars. Many of them struggled to get unemployment. The unemployment system was a disaster for the first probably about 2 months. We did everything we could to work with them to get them on unemployment. One of the blessings that did come through was the original PPP loans, where we were able to, for some of the folks that were still struggling to get unemployment, we were able to bring them back on payroll and pay them some of the PPP money that we had. Unfortunately for us, since we weren't open, we weren't able to serve customers, the PPP loans, that was all we could do was just use it to pay payroll, and that was it, and pay people to do nothing. Luckily, most of our employees were able to get on unemployment and help pay some bills, but unemployment is not enough to live on. Of course, it's not meant to be a permanent solution. It's meant to be a temporary stopgap. Well, not a lot of temporary stopgaps go on for 11 months. Many of our employees have had to move on and find other jobs. They've had to move back in with their parents, but still others really haven't had anything, and they're barely scraping by. It's tough. We stay in touch. We're a community, and we're a team, but now all of a sudden hopefully we'll be able to reopen our bars, but that means calling up the employees that haven't been able to work for months and saying, "Hey, do we still have a place for you? Are you able to come back to work?" And again, we got 2 days before that happens. So I guess that's a good problem to have. But
yeah, I didn't get a whole lot of warning on figuring out exactly when you could reactivate some of these spaces.
Communication has been a real issue in this state for the last 11 months. Everything kind of hits us out of the blue. Back in May when they first reopened brewery bars and restaurant bars, private bars and taverns were included on the list. And in the 11th hour, we were removed, and didn't see that coming. We'd already brought our staff back for that and had to lay them off back again. So yeah, there's been a lot of personal costs, a lot of heartache out here.
Yeah. With the change a few months back that allowed the outdoor seating only at bars at whatever the very, very limited capacity was, were any bars able to make that work? I feel like I saw one of your establishments was doing it for a brief time, and then as we got into winter, I guess it just made less and less sense to keep that open when people could go down the street to a restaurant and enjoy a bar in the warmth and dryness of indoor space.
Yeah, for example, our bar Coughlin's Raleigh, we had a large outdoor parking lot, and when the news came that we could actually open up at 30% capacity outdoors, that was late October, early November, and it was already getting cold. Days were getting short, and it rained a whole lot, pretty much every weekend. It felt like. So we waited for a few weekends before we gave it a shot. We tried to open. Our revenues were under 10% what they were the year before on those specific days, not even counting the rest of the week that we were closed. So Friday, Saturday, we were down 90% of revenue, and we weren't making enough to cover product, let alone pay our staff and the power and the having a DJ spin. On the other hand, we had our bar Parliament. It's a small 800 square foot bar, has about 12 seats outside in Glenwood South. Well, at 30% capacity, we were only allowed 3 customers. So, there's really not a bartender in the world that can make those numbers work. So we weren't able to open. I think that 99% of the bars in North Carolina were in the same shoes as we are. It takes a whole lot to open a bar, to run it safely. On top of having bartenders, you have to have security. You have to have folks that are enforcing the COVID-19 mandates, making sure people are wearing their masks and staying socially distanced. And you also have to make it fun. That's why we had a DJ. But take all the stress that we're going to try and hope for a clear, non-rainy night on a Friday or a Saturday when they can just walk next door into the restaurant next door and drink that same beer at a bar and hang out with their friends in the warmth. It's just like you said at the beginning, it's a tough sell, and I don't think a lot of bars were able to make that work at all.
Yeah, and with the curfew, did that sort of change consumer behaviors at all in terms of people shifting their social drinking earlier in the evening, or did that just sort of encourage people who like to go out at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night to just have a house party at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night rather than going to a bar because they're all closed under the curfew?
When the curfew dropped from 11 p.m. To 9 p.m., alcohol sales cut off. It just completely devastated any business we had. We weren't really making it in the first place, of course. But yeah, like you said, people that were going to go out. I mean, you couldn't, the Super Bowl doesn't end by 9 o'clock. People couldn't go out and watch the Super Bowl at their favorite sports bar, even if they wanted to sit at a table socially distanced. It really discouraged people from coming out completely. Unfortunately, we hoped that people would come out earlier and shift their habits, but that didn't happen. Moving the curfew back to 11 p.m. for us this time around is huge. There's a whole lot more. I mean, as we all know, 90% of bar business comes in between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So now at least we have from 10 to 11 to try and sell a few drinks and maybe pay off a few of these bills that have been piling up.
Yeah, and it was the new executive order. You're at 30%. That's still below the 50% that your counterparts in the restaurant world are under. Is there still a fairness issue here? I know the 30% margin was what your group had asked for in hopes of, I guess, getting something out of this current round of executive orders.
Well, we've been working with the governor's office for the last 11 months, trying to get equality across the hospitality industry. 85% of bars were reopened back in May 2020. That was restaurant bars, brewery bars, hotel bars, even strip clubs were allowed to reopen. The only folks that had to stay closed were people with a private bar liquor license. There's 1,063 of us. We sued the administration, went to court, and asked them to prove why is there a substantial difference between a private bar versus one of these brewery bars? Why is it safe to have a beer at a brewery and not safe to have that same beer at my bar? And the only argument that we really got out of it was, well, breweries create more jobs than bars, which, to that point, I think you're picking winners and losers. And I don't think that's what the government should be in the business of doing. That being said, today's victory with the 30% opening, or 30% capacity inside bars, it's a small victory and it's a hollow victory for some. At the same time, it's better than zero. We're going to continue to fight every single day to get equal treatment with restaurant bars and everybody else in the business. But tonight we're celebrating, and I think it's a great thing. I think that as we continue to see the case count for COVID-19 drop across the state, as we continue to see the number of people vaccinated soar, I think we're going to see these restrictions fall off a lot quicker than they went on.
Is it a concern for the long term that there was this? I understand from the lawsuit there was a claim from the governor's team that economic development, economic impacts paid an impact. I guess that's that sort of economic developer's argument that, we get a craft brewery in this area that's, industrial wasteland zone and everything comes back, and therefore we don't want to mess with that industry, whereas we're okay with the bars. Is that just an issue of who has a better lobbyist, and this sort of comes down to who's in a better position to make their case to the people making these decisions?
In the past, there was no organization like the North Carolina Bar and Tavern Association. Bars were content to be represented by the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association, which does a good job for restaurants and hotels. But bars were kind of the black sheep of the family, and without anyone at the table to give bars a voice, we were kind of cast to the side. There's only 1,063 of us. We had talked about forming the North Carolina Bar and Tavern Association for several years before, especially after Raleigh tried to outlaw outdoor drinking on Fayetteville Street and for bars, but allow it for restaurants. We started coming together, but we didn't make it formal. And, that was a mistake. I think we should have done it a lot earlier. And I think we're paying the cost by not having that representation. But the good news is that we exist now, and we've got over 200 member bars, and we're really fighting to have a voice at the table. Being able to do this podcast with you is part of that voice, and being able to kind of make it known that we want to be part of this community. We already are a huge part of our communities. Neighborhood bars raise so much money for charity. They sponsor kickball teams. They sponsor pet adoption events. They sponsor Wounded Warrior veterans events, you name it. So when I hear that we don't make a big enough economic impact to count, it pisses me off. It's not true. And I think that I don't think it's right to say that the job of a bartender or a door security worker or the delivery guy that delivers that local brewer's beer to my bar, that their job's not okay, is not valued the same. I think it's wrong, and I think it's something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah. Do you think there's going to be long-term consequences to this? I mean, you already have had to close one bar. I'm sure a lot of other bar owners have had to shut down. And you look at an area like Glenwood South, Fayetteville Street, where a lot of those storefronts, a lot of that activity is from businesses that are classified as a bar. Is it going to be harder with this long period of closure, even when you are back to normal, to have the same density of nightlife opportunities and things that sort of make these areas vibrant? Or are we going to see some shifts in, what a street like Glenwood South looks like in terms of the business makeup and people's willingness to make that part of their Saturday night routine?
Well, I think we're already seeing the direct impacts on Fayetteville Street. It's a scary place at night. Now the boards are still up on the windows. There's trash everywhere. Even the entrance to Coughlin's was just filled with trash and human refuse for the last 2-3 weeks. I think people aren't necessarily going to be returning to Fayetteville Street anytime soon. Glenwood South has been doing okay. One of the biggest problems is that by closing private bars but allowing 85% of our direct competitors to stay open, consumers have changed their habits. And maybe now instead of going to Coughlin's to go dancing, they're going to go over to the brewery and go dancing. Or you name it. We have our bar Parliament. We had our lights off. Our doors were closed, and there was a line down the street for the restaurant next door, Tin Roof. People went up there to have a good time. They're doing great. The thing about me is I want to see everybody do great, and I don't blame them at all. But what I do think is unfair is to have our direct competitors open. And now even with being able to reopen, at 30% capacity, we've got a long way to go just to be able to pay back this debt and to get people back in our doors. We have to market. We have to say we're open. We have to educate the consumer that it's okay to come back out to nightclubs and to taverns and to their neighborhood bar. So yeah, we have a whole lot of work ahead of us. That's for sure.
I wanted to run through some of the pieces of legislation that are floating around to get a sense for how well they would help out. We've got the bill, I guess, on the governor's desk that's the sort of temporary reprieve on ABC permit fees, but there was another bill that's going through the state house that would essentially waive the entire fee for the next coming year. What kind of impacts would those have on the ability to make ends meet and survive the next few months before things get back to normal?
Representative Moffitt is the new head of the ABC committee in the House, and he's been doing great things for us, helping us get legislation like the ABC fee reprieves. Those are a step in the right direction. It's not the whole ballgame by any means. Most bars pay between $2,000 to $4,000 in their licensing fee every year to be able to sell. Having those fees waived will be a big help, especially because we're entering in renewal season, and at the same time, we're just now being able to have customers back in our bars. So not having to pay that is going to be a big help. One thing that we're really pushing for is for private bars that have been closed the entire pandemic. We're asking for the legislature to help us by waiving the mixed beverage fee. Whenever we go to buy liquor from the state, we actually pay more. If I go buy a bottle of Bullet Bourbon, I'm going to pay more as a bar than you would pay, Colin, if you went in the ABC store yourself. ABC stores last year actually made more money than ever, despite the fact that they weren't getting those mixed beverage taxes from us because we weren't able to order anything. So there is money. I think everybody thought it was that they're going to be going in with a deficit, but it turns out there is still money. What we want to see going forward is for the next 18 months, we want to waive that mixed beverage tax on private bars. That'll help us get the product a little bit cheaper, and it helps put money back into bar owners' pockets, which they can use to rebuild their businesses and pay off debt. So that's a big push that we're doing going forward.
Yeah, and I guess that's a fundamental fairness issue is, maybe it made sense when you were doing really well for you to pay more for a bottle of liquor than I should pay as a consumer. But, now the tables have turned in that sense, and there's no reason that you're in a better position to pay more than anybody else.
Yeah, it's a great way to give targeted relief to these business owners. One of the problems that we have is that most private bar owners, in fact, 99% of private bar owners in North Carolina are small businesses. There aren't national chains that do this, but they're also renters. So waiving things like property tax doesn't necessarily help us. Giving these, like there was the rent relief program that the governor announced where they allowed folks to get up to $20,000 in rent reimbursement. Well, that money goes to our landlords. It doesn't go to the bar owners, and it doesn't go to our staff. And when a landlord says, well, wait a minute, you're behind in rent. Now I see there's $20,000 available. Pay me that, and you're still behind in rent. So what we need to do is find direct targeted relief that goes to the people in need. And I think that waiving that mixed beverage tax is the right way to do that.
There's also a bill filed that looks at local property taxes and basically forcing cities and counties to give people longer to pay. Does that make sense for bars, or you find most bars are, tenants in their facilities and wouldn't necessarily benefit from property tax because they're paying rent, they're not paying property taxes directly?
The vast majority of bars are tenants. We already pay exorbitant rates to be able to operate our bars in the buildings that we're in, and most of the time we don't own those buildings. So property tax deferral, it doesn't really help us. And honestly, really any deferrals don't really help us either. We're already behind the 8 ball. So giving us an extra 6 months to pay an outstanding tax doesn't really do great for us. One of the things we're going to be seeing, even as bars reopen, is you're going to have landlords that come to the bar and say, hey, look, man, I've been letting you pay half rent for the last 11 months, but I see that you're open, and I'm sorry you're at 30% and not 100% capacity, but it's time to start paying full rent. And it's hard to blame those landlords. They've been suffering too. But imagine having that much back rent that's owed, and at 30% occupancy, and we don't necessarily know what the future is going to bring. We don't know when customers are going to feel safe to go back, even if the restrictions are dropped. You're going to see a lot of bars that just can't make it. I think we're going to see another wave of bars closed right around the end of the year.
Is there any room for some help from direct grants? I know that was a proposal from the Restaurant and Lodging Association to try to really get at places that have lost a significant percentage of their revenue, and for those to get some of the direct payments from the state that so far have been going to businesses based on job retention, which I guess doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you're a business that hasn't been able to retain jobs because you haven't been open.
I think there's a lot of businesses in North Carolina and across the United States that have received a bunch of relief money, although they haven't had to change their operations much at all. That certainly haven't seen the drastic sales drop off that bars and taverns have seen, and bars and restaurants as well. I do think that the Restaurants Act going through the federal government right now is a step in the right direction. I think we're going to have to see relief come from the top down, and I hope that the Biden administration pushes that through. And, it's a bipartisan relief act, and I think it's something that's essential. But when it goes to North Carolina, it's up to our state government to figure out how to spend that money. And I really hope that they direct the funds to the people that need it most. And that's the hospitality industry.
Is there a need to extend the cocktails to go, or has that been effective at all in terms of adding a little bit to your bottom line? I don't know how well that's worked out for bars versus for restaurants in terms of that actually being a new revenue source for the last month or so.
Hey, we'll take every bit we can get. Cocktails to go is not a realistic way to make up for lost revenue of 11 months straight being closed. At the same time, it's something. And there are certain bars that are able to make it work. Delivery business, to-go business, any restaurateur will tell you, it's a tough game to be in. As for a bartender, it's tough for me to convince. I probably can't convince you to come get a Manhattan from my bar one time and pay me, $12 for it. But, are you really going to keep doing that week after week? Or is it more likely you're going to learn how to make a Manhattan in your house and go to the ABC store and do the same thing? Bars are all about atmosphere. They're about community. They're about people getting together. And in order for us to get back fully, we have to be able to do that the way that we used to. And that's why, seeing these vaccination rates going up is encouraging to us. We're ready to put the pandemic in the rearview mirror.
Any other policy suggestions that you'd like to see if you were able to wave a magic wand and do what can be done to make sure your business is around in 12 months and other bars as well?
I think that it's important that we find ways to support small businesses as opposed to national chains. I think that one of the major things we're going to start seeing over the next year or two is that a lot of these unique local businesses are going to be gone, and they'll be replaced with Panera Bread or, Red Robin Burgers. And that's for bars and restaurants. I think that we need to find a way to stop spending all this money in tax breaks or, building a new stadium in downtown Raleigh and taking tax money to do that. Why don't we take that tax money and put it towards the small businesses where you're getting 5 times the dollar on economic impact through the jobs that we're creating and the customers that we're serving. I think that the other thing that we really want to see is we want to see bars treated the same as restaurants when it comes to any more of this as legislation comes down. We saw it in Raleigh when they wanted to outlaw drinking on the patios for bars, but allow it for restaurants. We saw it again during the pandemic when private bars were closed, but restaurants were open. It doesn't make any sense. It's discouraging, and it's not how other states are doing it. We got to fix that.
Right. Well, thanks so much. Zack Medford is head of the NC Bars and Tavern Association. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast and filling us in, and good luck as you hopefully get back to normal operations over the next few months.
Thank you, Colin. Appreciate it.
All right. And thanks for listening to this episode of Under the Dome. I'm Colin Campbell.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Under the Dome and NC Insider, and sign up for our weekly political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.